I'm Ramona Ali, and I'm delighted to be chairing what will be a thought-provoking and fascinating session that explores the question, on a scale of 1 to Muslim, how Sufi are you? Joining me to unravel it all are a Sufi superpanel of speakers. We're happy to have Dr. Humaira Shahid, who is a Pakistani journalist, human rights activist, and a former member of the Pakistani Parliament, where she's worked on human rights issues, including violence against women. She's also been a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard University, and she hosts an online course called Women and Power that strives to reclaim freedom and autonomy for modern Muslim women. We also have Professor Alan Williams, who is a professor of Iranian studies and comparative religion at Manchester University in the UK. His expertise is in classical and modern Persian, Iranian studies, Sufism, and Islam. He's also published translations of some volumes of Rumi's Masnavi in English. And lastly, I put her last because I know her very well, Medina Tanur Whiteman, who is a writer, poet, translator, and musician living in Spain. She's the author of a collection of poetry named Love is a Traveller and We Are Its Path, and also Huma's Travel Guide to Islamic Spain. She has recently written a memoir called The Invisible Muslim, Journeys Through Whiteness and Islam, published in 2020, which I have read, and it was excellent, and it made me realize she's a lot cleverer than I thought. Thank you to all of you for joining us. I'm really excited about this conversation because it isn't really happening in the public sphere. So it'd be great to get all of your personal reflections on this, as well as untangle the historical, social, and cultural maze that is Sufism. So to begin with, I'll start with a statement that I have often heard that goes, "Today, Sufism is a name without a reality. It was once a reality without a name." So bearing this in mind, what does Sufism, or tasawwuf, the Arabic term, mean to you? And I think I'll come first to Dr. Humaira Shahid. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramona. And the quote you have quoted is so much a reality of our times. And having the exposure both from the West and the East, I think we have in Pakistan a domination of the tasawwuf, which is almost performative, ritual-based, silsilas. And I was fascinated from a very young age with the Sufis and the meaning of Islam and the whole idea of how do you get truly powerful and free, which is something we only think about. We aspire to be, but we've never, be able to reach there. And the more I attended these, ritual-based ceremonies, which I honestly, without being disrespectful, I would call like singing clubs. And there was an absence of teaching, because I can't understand that how you can separate Sharia and Hakika. I mean, at that time, from a very young age, I knew there's an inward journey of Islam and there is an outward journey of Islam. And this separation of Hakika and Sharia. And on the other hand, as a journalist and as a member of the parliament, I was working on a law against riba. See, the socioeconomic aspect of Islam. And I have years of exposure to the ulamas and scholars and all the different school of thoughts and the experts of fiqh. And I realized that, this literalist, conservatives, obsessively focusing on moral conduct of women and personal morality of people and the dress code. But where's the Islam that I am looking for? Where is the Islam? I mean, as a Muslim, what is a symbol of perfection for me? It's Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And what do I want to imitate in the Prophet? It's the heart of the Prophet inwardly. I would want to have or, imitate the heart of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And outwardly, I want his action, his justice, his equality, the freedom that he brought to the people. I could not see that neither in the ulamas and neither in the Sufis, the so-called kind of the suburb that existed in Pakistan. And this is where the dilemma was, because without the inward, as Ibn Khaldun says, the inward manifests outward, and the outward manifests in the inward. So in order to have a perfect asabiya, it has to start with the heart. The heart has to have compassion and love and care and true brotherhood. And then that manifests in the outward development of imarat. So that's why, we're talking about a socio-economic system that has justice and equality and protects the people. So in both cases, it was missing. And everything that I was doing outwardly, it was about empowering women. I had no idea that the issue of riba and the capitalist system is something is going to change my life, because from being literally disowned by my political party and to have threats, I mean, it was a very long struggle. Out of 5 years, 4 years, I was fighting in the committees of the parliaments, and I kept on bringing the ulemas to stand up with me. So I want to bring back that socioeconomic aspect of Islam. We have accepted banking and capitalism without question, and on the inner side, I was so afraid of myself. I realized that the kind of I cannot overcome my fears, my vulnerabilities, the shame that I've embodied as a woman, the reductionism as a woman I go through because of the society and the culture I live in. I mean, I was repeatedly asked to stay in my place. Why am I questioning the fiscal system of my province? And I said, I have the right, because riba is something that comes from the scriptures, and probably Pakistan is the one of the most unique places which has a clause in its constitution that the state must eliminate riba. But this was my outward action. Why was I doing that? Why would I take up a task that would literally marginalize my political career? Because I'm not politically correct in doing this. I'm not supposed to touch this. I'm not supposed to question this. But it was my commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I said, Allah, give me the work that nobody wants to do. And just for the um, bringing back the trading sunnah of the Prophet, which is one of the hardest sunnah to bring back right now in this capitalist paradigm. But I was so afraid inwardly, and I realized that I have to just go into stillness. I have to see inside myself. I have to see that why I fear so many things as a woman. I was becoming a man in that system. I was not becoming a woman. I was not reclaiming my femininity or my being a woman. I was just changing into a man, and you know, so I realized that the whole the Islam that I'm looking for, the inward strength that I fear nothing except Allah. I'm answerable to no one except Allah. My power lies from the 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 primal identity I have as a luminous being, Ruh, which is indestructible, which cannot be marked by any society, any culture, any abuse. And how do I recover that? How do I reclaim that? Why don't I allow myself to emerge? And what is this fears that fear, and especially in a country like Pakistan, the fear of being judged? You're like a constant trial. You're constantly observed. That do I fit into the box that they have created of a religious Pakistani woman, or a right politician, or a right kind of journalist, or a right kind of public figure? So that was a question. And I'm so glad that we are together speaking on this subject, because this hypocrisy, both we have. See, I'm not questioning the ulamas. I love them. And there are certainly some ulamas that are exemplary. And there are Sufis that changed my life, but they were the hidden people, not the mainstream Sufis. But that knowledge, both in tasawwuf, is lost because people are so obsessed with the rituals. And so is Sharia. The kind of Sharia we have, unfortunately, in the name of Wahhabism or Deobans or Barelvis or whatever school of thought you want to talk about, that Sharia does not needs that kind of inward, the hakika, and that hakika needs that kind of Sharia. So if we want to bring back the Sawuf, we have to bring the right kind of Sharia. And if we really want to implement the socio-economic aspect of Islam, we have to bring back that inward, that heart of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which cared, loved people.
Mm. Thank you so much. That was such a rich answer, and there's some things that we're going to unpack during this conversation that you spoke about. You touched on about your being a woman and all the kind of the social constraints that are on us. That I'd really like to explore that a little further later on. But now I'd like to move to Professor Alan Williams. Just to again put that question to you: what does Sufism mean to you?
Well, first of all, I should say who I am, because your introduction to me doesn't really give the whole story. I mean, of course not. But yeah, I am Professor of Iranian Studies. I've taught at Manchester for getting on for 40 years. I've been in academia, and I define myself not as a Christian scholar or as a Muslim scholar, but as an academic. And I think in what I teach, in teaching comparative religion and in teaching tasawwuf and in teaching other religions, I don't identify with the, so to speak, with the insider listener or speaker who has subjective particular views this way or that, but rather I look at the material and I try to talk as an academic. And I don't know whether that makes any sense to you, but it's very important to me because students do come up to me after lectures, or they used to. I don't teach anymore. I'm a research professor now. But they used to come up to me and ask me, so what do you believe? And my basic position is that I believe all of it. I believe all of it because it's not, for me, a matter of personal belief, but I'm looking at beliefs and I'm looking at religion and so on. So it's not up to me to make judgments really about what I can talk about is authenticity of traditions, and I can talk about sources and so on. So Sufism for me has been both part of my life personally and part of my daily work. And now it's pretty much every day, of course, because my work is entirely on the Masnavi. And I have to correct you there because unfortunately I haven't yet finished all 6 books of the Masnavi. It will take me until I'm way beyond 70 to finish it. I have published 2 volumes so far. I've got them in front of me. They're pretty big volumes. This is the first daftar of the Masnavi, and this is the second daftar. And that's about 1,100 pages of text. I'm just about to publish the 3rd daftar or volume of the Masnavi, and I have the 4th and 5th and 6th in preparation. But it's going to be a long time, and it's somebody once said to me, yes, Alan, you put the later into translator, and I'm very happy with that because I think that only by spending time with Rumi, with spending time with Sufism, does one absorb it. And I'm now getting on in age, but I feel I understand Rumi and Sufism far better now than when I was 16, when I was first introduced to it over 50 years ago. So to me, it is a very human and a very personal thing, but I don't pretend to be a sociologist like Dr. Shahed. Her expertise in political and social movements within Islam and Sufism, that's not my forte. I've spent my whole life working with Sufi texts, not just Sufi texts, but religious texts from Iran, pre-Islamic Zoroastrian texts. Half of my publications are on Zoroastrianism, articles and so on. And only in mid-career did I come back to the Sufism I began studying in 1972 at Oxford. And I came back to that in the early 2000s when I published the first volume for Penguin Classics. And I've been coming in and out of Sufi studies all that time. So I'm not saying anything very significant here about what I understand Sufism to be, except I can say this, that it is a most inspiring field, and I feel uplifted when I open Sufi texts. I concentrate on the classical period of the 13th century now, and I have taught and I have translated modern texts, but I prefer to stay in the 13th century, and there are good reasons for that. I'm not going to say that they don't answer back, but working with living communities, as I did working with Zoroastrian communities in India and Iran, that has its drawbacks. And one gets involved in contemporary issues. And as an academic, I find it much better to work with matters that are textual and it's simpler. So that's a bit of a cop-out, isn't it, really, I suppose, saying, but somebody has to do this work, and I enjoy doing my work with the texts.
Thank you so much. And that's why it's so important to have such a diverse panel as well, because you each have a very unique field of expertise, and your relationship with Sufism is really, really fascinating. And I will come back to you, Professor Onrumi, if I may. But for now, I'm going to go to Medina, please. Just whatever you would like to share with us about your relationship with Sufism or your take on it.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Ramona. I'm in illustrious company indeed. I'm very thankful to be included in this panel. Gosh. So, excuse me. The way that I have any relationship to Sufism at all, and I'm very wary of calling myself a Sufi, because to me it sounds like calling myself a bodhisattva or something like this. Like a Sufi is a person who's completely divested from material possessions and isn't bothered when difficult things happen to them or people insult them or anything like this, according to the stories of Sufis that I've come across over the years. But my relationship to Sufism or to Tasawwuf is entirely because of my parents. I have to give all the credit to them, really, because I was born into a family of converts, and they had become Muslim through a series of different Sufi communities. They were connected to various different tariqas and groups over the years in the States and in the UK. The strongest connection, I think, was to a Shadhili tariqa based in Meknes from a Fezi Farsi sheikh called Sheikh Muhammad ibn al-Habib. And he wrote a very beautiful diwan of poetry. And so growing up, my relationship was really entirely channeled through this diwan and through singing it and reading the translations of it. Because as a child, you see examples of it in the way that your parents treat you, of course, and the way that they relate to other people. And that's how your first experiences of everything happen, your language, culture, everything. It's this imprinting. And, but, the sort of more abstruse or intellectual, sort of spiritual elements of it they go completely over your head. What you see is what you get, it's what you learn. So it's very scary being a parent, because you realize that everything you're doing, your children are absorbing and witnessing and watching and repeating, and you have to face up to them again at some point. But I think the way that I first kind of consciously related to Sufism was through sitting in, as Dr. Humaira mentioned, these sort of singing clubs. Although they were probably a little bit different, because I grew up near Cambridge. We would go to different sort of gatherings, usually at people's houses. Cambridge is a very diverse city because of the university, and many of the people who came to these gatherings were university students or sometimes teachers or visiting professors. They were from all over the world. You had Bosnians, you had Nigerians, you had Pakistanis, you had Syrians, you had people from everywhere. So it was a little bit like a sort of United Nations of Sufism. So I think it was a little bit more of a rarefied experience, rather than coming to it from a culture that has been rooted in one particular practice for many hundreds of years. So it was a little bit different and strange in that sense. I think it had its own kind of issues and its own sort of beauties to it. But listening to sound is very immediate and transformative, I would say. When you sing, or if you play an acoustic instrument, you're physically vibrating the air. Those vibrations enter another person's body and they vibrate all the little bones inside their ears. they vibrate their chest. You are physically changing. There's a movement coming from your own chest to another person's chest. It's quite an extraordinary kind of intimate thing. So if you're singing together with people, also there's been studies on this. If you sing in a choir, the choir members' heart rates synchronize. So something very beautiful about doing this. And if you do it with strangers as well, and you're not sitting on a stage, you're not doing this as a performance, it can be very emotional. People might start crying. It's quite a private thing that you're doing, actually, but next to people as well. Same thing happens with prayer as well, and reading Quran. There's something very similar happening there. It's a very interesting space to be in, especially as a child, to witness that and to grow up in that, I think. And over the years, as I got a bit older, and I could actually sit and listen and read the translations. Obviously, the Arabic, I don't really speak Arabic per se. I can just get along, shwaya shwaya. But from listening to the songs, and these melodies were coming from Morocco, from Mauritania, from Algeria, most of the time. Reading the words alongside them in translation. They are very pithy. They're very poetic, very meaningful. Quite unlike anything that you are taught in school. You know, the cosmos is meaning set up in images, you know, things like this, which normally children don't get taught, and probably messed up a few people as well, I think, along the way, because this is a whole different way of approaching reality. So this was my first experience of tasawwuf, really. And then over the years, it's something that I've always felt very attached to, and very kind of ironically attached to it, but something I've come back to often as a way of managing, just existing, being in the world, and all the everyday difficulties and stresses of experiencing other people, and, you know, this obnoxious person, or this difficulty in university or at work or whatever, or relationships. It's a practice. I think the worship element of it is obviously uppermost. Dhikr, remembrance, being present. But in order to do that, you have to also practice muhasabah. And muhasabah is something that I think it should be taught as mindfulness is taught, you know, like it should be available in the NHS, you know, have muhasabah classes or something like this.
Can you just say what that is in English?
Muhasabah is muhasabah. It means self-reflection. It means calling oneself to account. It's from the same root as hasaba. Is like to account. Literally, a hasib is an accountant. So a muhasabah is like an introspection.
The bill. That's all I know.
Well, you do pay the bill, actually.
You pay your spiritual bill.
Spiritual bill, I suppose you could say. And many, you know, there are CBT practitioners and therapists now that will say, you know, practice this at the end of the day before you go to bed. Look over what's happened to you today. Look over your actions. Is there something I could have done better? Is there some way I could have behaved differently or spoken differently to that person? Could I have managed that differently? And it's a very interesting thing to do, even if you were to secularize it. It's a way of really maturing thought and assessing your own self, your own behavior, your thought patterns, and kind of stepping up aside from it. Even though I don't really believe we can never be completely objective, because we're always here. Our personalities don't go anywhere. But it's a way of sort of not allowing your thought patterns or your emotions to completely overwhelm you. So for somebody who struggles with anxiety or depression or any of these things, I think that can be very, very helpful. Aside from just the way of connecting to lots of other people in a very, for me, I'm very fortunate to have experienced Sufism in a very positive way. I know not everybody has had that experience, and that's something I think we'll probably come to in a minute.
Thank you so much, Medina. And actually, I just wanted to pick up on your experience as a female Muslim musician. I'm really interested in how music has often been seen as a taboo for many Muslims, and there's a tendency to kind of separate music from spirituality, as if music is something that will suppress ourselves and being close to God. And on top of that, the female voice has been very controversial. But how has music channeled your connection with God?
That's a very interesting question, and I understand it's a very controversial issue. The female voice is already, for some Muslims, it's considered part of our awra, part of our private parts. personally, I don't know how I could exist in the world without ever raising my voice in public, because I'm quite a talkative person. But apart from that, the reason why my father became Muslim was through music. He was a musician. In the 1960s, he was in a string of bands, kind of prog rock bands and things like this, an early mod band. And one of the members of his band had become Muslim, actually, through this same connection to Morocco. And over time, the way that my father got introduced to this community and got introduced to Islam was through going to these gatherings and singing. And as a musician, he found something happened as he listened to this music. He said, this is extraordinary. This is out of this world. It's beautiful, without even knowing what it meant, just listening to the melodies of it and feeling what it did to him. So I know that sounds maybe like a very kind of rough way for a person to sort of approach a religion or to take on a religion, but it's a very personal and I think very immediate sort of impact that it had on him. So whenever I sort of think to myself, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, maybe I shouldn't. And I do occasionally sort of think, oh, I'll just leave it, you know. I will not only think of that, but I'll also suddenly get a message from somebody saying, you have to keep playing music because it's very beautiful. This kind of music, this sound is very healing. And I do think that there are sounds that are very healing. And again, coming back to all the sort of disorders that so many of us experience, and I think societally we have lots of disorders as well. Just the sounds that we are listening to, they do affect us. If you live next to a train track and you're constantly listening to all day long, that's going to affect you. If you're in an office and you just hear lots of beeping, if you have lots of notifications on your phone, it'll drive you mad eventually, you know. Whereas if you're surrounded by very soothing sounds, if you go out into nature and you listen to birdsong, you listen to a stream, birds are singing, that's music. There's a very kind of elemental, very innocent form of music that I think we're capable of doing. And this is something that is actually, I think it's a huge tragedy that we lose that. The context that we do it in is something that we can discuss, you know, making those spaces safe. If you want to make them gender, you know, one gender only, I don't think there's a problem with that, making people comfortable with doing that. But I think forbidding ourselves from singing is a crime, actually. I think it's an awful thing to stop people from singing, full stop.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And now I'd just like to kind of talk about the post 9/11 world and how Islam has been kind of fragmented further into like soft Sufis and hard-boiled everybody else. I feel that maybe there's a bit more, there's a furthering of division. And I'm also really interested in the parallels and the differences between the attitudes that have formed, especially recently, towards Sufism in the UK and in Pakistan, and broadly speaking from your own experiences as well. So how do you believe Sufism is viewed in your locality, in Pakistan or in Britain? Professor, perhaps I'll come to you first about the attitudes to Sufism in the UK, especially in a 9/11 world, post 9/11 world. Thank you.
Well, if you're asking me, I would say the first thing is that there are two constituencies of Sufis. There are those who are Muslim Sufis, and there are those who are, so to speak, not particularly religiously affiliated as Sufis. So there are Sufis who pray, who practice Islam, and there are Sufis who've either dispensed with it and think it's unnecessary, or never started in the first place because they come to it from a Christian or an agnostic background. So, I mean, in Manchester, where I've taught, I'm surrounded by Muslim communities where the leaders of their mosques and so on are called Mawlavis. You know, they are leaders of their ethnic minority communities to whom, coming from South Asia originally, to whom Sufism is not a strange creature. It's familiar from Pakistan and India and elsewhere, of course, North Africa. and then there are the other sorts of, I mean, you realize that I'm speaking in a very condensed way, but the Sufis who, or people who identify with Sufism or who are interested in it, may actually know nothing or very little about the history of Islam, but may have come to it through inspirational literature. And this has been going on for a century or so, I think, until the West began to take an interest in things non-Christian, outside the Christian world. So it goes back to, you know, the rise of the Theosophists in the late 19th century and this interest in Sufism. When I was at university 45 years ago or so, there wasn't much interest in Sufism among Westerners. If you went into Blackwell's in Oxford, there were a couple of books, mostly scholarly books on Sufism. Trimmingham had just published his book on Sufi orders in Islam. And then there were the old sort of Orientalist translations of Sufi classics. But apart from that, you know, until 9/11, you mentioned 9/11, it made a huge difference in people's uptake and interest in Islam. There wasn't a copy of the Quran in the White House, I read, at the time of the 9/11 attack. There wasn't a copy of the Quran there. Now, of course, there are whole departments who specialize in the study of Islam, especially with regard to that dreadful word, terrorism. And Islam has become associated with Islamism, and Sufism, in a sense, has had to play second or third fiddle to that. And it's, in a sense, a minority interest. But there are certainly hundreds and hundreds of books on Sufism, and there are many people who've made considerable careers out of popularizing Sufism. So the bookshelves are groaning with. So around me, there are people who think they know a great deal about Sufism without knowing much about Islam. And well, this new musical in London that is opening is going to create a bit of a wave, I think. It's already had an impact on me. I've been asked to comment on it. And I mean, this time of the year is kind of roomy time because it's his Sheb Arus coming up in December, and his death day, his anniversary. But this musical is just the latest of a series of media things that are, to my mind, to some extent, exploiting Sufism for entertainment, exploiting Sufis like Maulana for entertainment purposes. Now, what can I say? It's all well and good, and each to their own. And obviously, I would come across as being more of a purist, you know, but really, genuinely, I think it is for the good. Interest in Sufism is generally a good thing because it is the spiritual dimension of Islam. But as you know, the right wing gets hold of it in America. The right wing gets hold of soft Sufis, as you call them, and likes to promote that side of Islam as the leading edge of Islam. And of course, for many, it's not. It is much more a political and a post-colonial matter that is about power and struggle. And here I will hand over to others who know much better about these matters.
Thank you so much. There's so much to explore there. I wish we had a lot more time than we do. But thank you so much for that overview. Dr. Hamera, would you like to comment on anything that the professor has said, and also just to give us an insight into the attitudes towards Sufism in Pakistan? And you're just on mute. If you could just unmute yourself, and then we'll start.
I'm saying this, the Tasawwuf in the West or the East, I don't think we can divide it geographically, you know. Let me make you understand the way I came to understand it. And what is this existence about? You know, the fundamental question. Why are we here? What is our purpose? So man is trying to understand himself. Man is trying to understand his relationship with God. Man is trying to understand the meaning of his life, the relationship he has with others and the world. Now, who were the Sufis? Who's Ibn Arabi? Who's Maulana Rumi? Who's Umar bin Khattab, Razila Ta'ala anhu? I mean, just to understand and to enter into who these people were. These were people who loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the people who were, they were in the presence of Allah. These were the people who witnessed the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were ready to devote their lives to die for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We follow Islam because it is the command of our beloved, not the other way around. We don't love Islam and we don't love Sharia. We love Allah. Quran is important to us. We love it because it's Allah's word. Sharia is his commands. We do it because we want the pleasure. We want to follow what he says. So this is the Sufi, with the people who loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their life was about worshipping Allah. They feared nothing except Allah. So, and then everything rest follows in. Now, me growing up in this world today, everything that I see about myself, about the world, about the God, is coming from humanistic sciences. It's and humanistic sciences have put man into boxes. Biology sees a man as a biological machine. Psychology sees the thinking and the problems of a thinking mind. Anthropology is about culture. Sociology is about human interactions. And we have split man into this instead of a wholesome, a man who has a spirit and a human experience, the meaning of everything, and we have just compartmentalized it. So this is the culture and the academia and the world that I was living in. And I had split personality. So this takes me back to humanism. So humanism was an attempt of man defining truth. So man, in order to define truth, because it comes from his limited perception, and truth is much larger than our comprehensions. So in the attempt of defining truth, we reduce the truth. And then everything was coming from our subjective perception. We made false claims of objectivity. And Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, talks about false objectivism. He says everything that is there that we think and we portray, we are not actually trying to reach the truth. We are actually thinking our thoughts over and over again. So this is so man says, I define the reality. Is what I think, what I feel, and how I define it. And then the whole thing was to depend on rationalism, logic, which is one important aspect of human faculty, but not the only one. So let's go to Tasawwuf now, Sufism. How does Sufism see everything? Man is not the center of the world. Allah is. This is our measuring point. The centrality of our experiences, the center is Allah. And from there we define everything. Myself, the world, the meaning of my existence and everything. And then it's not the man who measures the world. It is the man who's being measured. It's the man who's being observed. This is what Tasawwuf is. And from there, how do I understand? And one of the things that I love Maulana Rumi, because the thing that changed my life, the door that Maulana Rumi opened for me was that line, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. Because cleverness is mere opinion and bewilderment is vision, intuition, basira, mushahida. So this takes me back. Bewilderment. What is really bewilderment? So everything that I was doing was opinion-based. So we are actually doing tasawwuf with our head. Now this brings me back that, can you talk about, is taqwa a concept? Or is taqwa, the fear of Allah, is something that is in your heart? Can you understand gratitude by conceptualizing it? Or you actually practice and experience and embody gratitude in your heart? Now, I come back to the $1 million question of our century. Is Allah a concept? What we've done is we have conceptualized Allah. Allah has become an idea. We have tried to rationalize it. We've tried to define it. We cannot do it. It's much larger than us. We have degraded ourselves by defining man into these different compartments. Man is much higher than that. Man is much profound than that. So Rumi takes us back to the Haira. Now, where is Haira coming from? Haira, bewilderment, comes from the heart, which took me back. And when I started reading Masnavi, I had to go back to the Persian text. I had to then connect the words that they were coming from Arabic. So it took me to the word that akal and insight that Maulana Rumi is talking about, cognition of the heart. It took me back and I said, where is this coming from? Because akal is a word used in Persian and Arabic and is seen as intellect and the rational faculty. But then it took me back to Surah Hajj, ayat number 46, where Allah says, I've given you eyes to see and ears to hear and heart to comprehend. And the word is qulu biyakilun, the qalb, the akal of the qalb. So that was kind of like a decoding for me, that the heart, we've been worshiping with our heart. I mean, I ended up loving my husband with a head. It was a mental process until I realized this is another domain, another cognition which has been lost. The Sufis are actually preserver of the knowledge of the heart. The dynamics of love and fear, which do not come under the rational domain. We can't act rationally if we are in a state of fear and love. So this is another world. And what is tasawwuf? The tasawwuf is the management of the heart. And in doing that, you actually reach Allah. You reach into the thing that we don't want to question is who we are, why we are here, what is Allah. And look, the word mushahada is so important. What do the Muslims say? We do shahada. What does shahada mean? Shahada means we witness, not we believe, not we conceptualize. We witness that there is no God except Allah, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last messenger of Allah. So it's witnessing this process. These people were witnesses. These people witness. Now, to see something, to believe something, and to witness something is very different. It's so profound. It's life-changing. And this is what Maulana Rumi and Ibn Arabi and these amazing Sufis were. And you cannot brand them into these different boxes. This is a different kind of world they lived in. These were the lovers of Allah. These were the people who were aware of Allah. What is tasawwuf? To be aware of Allah, to rely on, it is to give up the micromanagement of your life and to go with the flow, with the wisdom of life that Allah has created. It is to enter into the meanings of things. We have an external reality and we are so fixated and engaged. And we always live in our head. I mean, the tragedy of our century is we live in our heads. We don't know how to stop the noise of our heads. We live in narratives. So how do you go back to Haira, which Maulana Rumi is constantly talking about, bewilderment, that state of wandering and amazement, where there is no preconceived notion and where you allow the meanings to unfold. You can't do it with your head. You have to go back to the heart, qalb. And that's what these Sufis were about. There's another way of understanding Quran through the qalb. It's not everything is linguistic. Not everything needs to be branded. Not everything needs to be compartmented. I mean, this is narrative. This is the way how the West understands things. But if you read Ibn Khaldun, you can't say he's a sociologist or a historian. Ibn Khaldun is a profound thinker who can contemplate truth. But from multiple levels of cognition, heart, head, there are more ways of understanding which we have forgotten.
Yeah, that's really, really profound. And it is, we do live in labels. We are surrounded with labels, and we put them on us as well. And we're so far behind getting to what you're talking about. I feel like we're just so divorced, as human beings from what our higher state can be. And sadly, I'm going to talk about labels again to Medina, actually, because she does talk about identity herself as a white Muslim in her book, and you're very frank about it and you're very open about it. And I don't know if you want to pick up on anything that Dr. Hamera has said, but I'd really be interested in your book, The Invisible Muslim, when it comes to a sense of belonging and community, has there ever been a tension for you there between I mean, your Muslimness and your whiteness. I know we try not to compartmentalize, but we're forced to do that sometimes, and we're forced to have those discussions. Can we transcend them? Have you been able to transcend them, Medina?
Well, I would love to say that I've been able to transcend all of these things. Inshallah, one day. Wow, there's so many things there that Humaira mentioned that I'd like to just take a moment to choose one thing to unpack.
Sure.
So you mentioned about the identity element. So, as I mentioned before, my experience of Sufism has come via a path that is a little bit unusual. My parents adopted Islam, and for them, it was a huge transformation. And you can imagine changing your name, changing your lifestyle, the way that you dress, the people who you relate to. Suddenly, the people that you grew up with think you're mad. Your parents think you're crazy. And worse, there's people who've been really, ostracized by their families, and all kinds of things that can go on there. And it can be a very painful experience as well, to sort of undo a lot of the things that you may have learned that you believe now were false. All of these kinds of things, which I'm actually very thankful to them that they went through that, because I didn't have to do it myself. I mean, I have it in my own way. I think there are a few things there. One, that we very often believe that to be a Muslim, one has to look a certain way. And I think this is the reason perhaps why Sufis often get a bit of flack, because that they can be a bit sort of too wiffly waffly, or a bit too like come as you are and who cares kind of thing. It can go both ways. There are certainly Sufi groups and tariqas that are very strict. Certainly, there's no reason why it should be outside of the Sharia. I mean, I don't see anything there that is necessary. There are practices, of course, that people introduce that are controversial, that may involve, I don't know, all kinds of strange sort of feats that people carry out. But there isn't anything there. I have heard of tasawwuf being defined as prayer with sincerity, as simple as that, prayer with sincerity. And I think, as Humaira was saying, like, if you bring it back into the awareness of your heart, if this is ilm al-qulub, this is the science of the heart, science of understanding how we work. And as the Prophet said, he who knows himself knows his Lord. So this is, again, it's a science of self-knowledge and of awareness, of taking that awareness really into very subtle domains in order to understand God, rather than just as a book learning. Although that book learning is also valuable, it's also useful, it's interesting, it's fascinating. I'm very much a cerebral person. I get lost in Wikipedia all the time, going down rabbit holes. It's all fascinating, but then at a certain point, you kind of have to undo it and sort of unravel that, or ravel it back up, that thread of attention, and go, well, where is it coming from? Where's this attention? Where's the source of it? And once you do that, you start to sort of think, okay, the externals, how important are they? How important are they really? So, for example, some Sufi environments that are very sort of, how do we say? I think in recent years, Sufism has sort of been tagged as a kind of soft alternative to like religion or something like this, like, oh, I'm just a Sufi, and people get branded as goofy Sufis or pseudo Sufis, or there's all this kind of, there's a whole smorgasbord of varieties of Sufis. And without wanting to go in there and create a hierarchy of who is better than who isn't, there are people who maybe they say the Shahada in their very last moments before they die, and for them that's going to be enough. I mean, we don't know. The thing is that ultimately we don't have that knowledge of, we can't get inside somebody else's heart and inside somebody else's soul or inside their life and recognize what is going to be necessary for them. So when my father became Muslim, and their teacher, their sheikh, said, don't worry about going back and finding halal meat in England, because this is the 1970s, early 1970s. I mean, it was almost unheard of. Just maintain good relationships with your family, with your parents. There are things that are actually quite common sense, that are just ethical. It's good ethics. It's just a kind of a compassionate way of life that really seems to be the basis of Sufism, as I think it's the basis of all religious and spiritual paths ultimately. But it can get a little bit lost sometimes in the kind of the glamour, or the paraphernalia, or the group identities and things like this. So I prefer not to sort of associate myself too much with this group over that group. I like to be friends with all of them and visit lots of different dhikr gatherings and just soak it up wherever, because, you know, again, to quote another hadith, wisdom is the lost property of the believer. They can take it wherever they find it, even in groups that aren't Muslim. If I feel like it resonates, I feel this is okay. I'm not going to, unless I see something very obviously that's problematic there. By contrast, you can find environments that are that on paper are very religiously okay, which when you sort of scratch the surface are not okay. And there's gender inequality, for example, that women are excluded from certain environments, or perhaps there's still very patriarchal attitudes there, which I think do need to be critiqued. And it's very difficult to critique them because, as Homer said, they're lovely people. You know, you could still find wonderful people, but perhaps there are certain things that need to be challenged or just interrogated or questioned. So, yeah, that's a very vague answer. But
it's not vague, it's really, there's just so much to say, and you know, there's so many layers even within what you've just said that I want to go into, but we haven't got enough time. But someone who has obviously transcended barriers is Maulana Rumi, and you know, he's a universal poet. You know, we know he's the most popular poet in the US with fans like Madonna. And you know, there was a meme going around of Rumi that probably a lot of people have seen, that with a quote that says, you know, my poetry is about Allah, not your girlfriend, or not your boyfriend. So actually, Professor, I'd really like to bring you in here on, you know, do you think that the universality of Rumi has actually removed God from the discourse?
Not in reality, no, of course not. In some people's minds it has. I mean, there are people who translate God out of the Masnavi, which is an extraordinary accomplishment, because the Masnavi is crammed with hundreds and if not thousands of quotations from Quran and Hadith. And on every page, in every other line, Rumi is always referring to his Lord and to the Quran. It is, as I often say, a mystical tafsir of Quran. It is, you know, it is said that it is, as Jami is said to have said, although probably this is apocryphal, that the Haste Quran Molavi Quran be Zabane Pahlavi, but the Quran in the Persian tongue. But that, I think, is stretching a point. The point is that it is a tafsir. And yes, people have lost sight of that, but it doesn't mean that the heritage of Rumi is damaged. And maybe the most popular things, like shows in the West End of London, will, as I think one of the actors or directors said the other day, in rehearsal to the journalist who made the program, the Sunday program that I was participating in, that maybe a few people will come to read Maulana in the original, in a more authentic translation as a result of seeing this show. But undoubtedly, you see, what popular translation does is to fillet the structure and the context, the Quranic, the Islamic context out, because it's seen by Western translators such as Pullman Barks, to mention just one of many who does this, who do this. To edit God out of the equation is wrong, in my view. I'm entitled to my view too. I don't have to remain on the fence forever. In my view, it is wrong to edit God out, because that's where it comes from, and that's where it goes to. I mean, there could be nothing more explicit than that this Masnavi is the Masnavi Matnavi, and the purpose of it is to die in God, is fana fillah. There's no more to it than that. I mean, we can turn it into the story of the me generation. We can turn it into self-help. But really, the ascetic path that Maulana teaches, the holy path, is the path to God. And if you take that object out of it and secularize it, you've done violence to it.
Mm-hmm.
I see the Masnavi and I see Maulana as providing an antidote to extremism, whether it be extremism of Islam or that is extremist Islam that is exclusivist, or extremism of godlessness, if you like, or atheism. It is a spiritual Masnavi, a Masnavi Matnavi.
I'd really like to bring in Dr. Hamera now. Just women like you, I feel, are pioneering in reviving that lost legacy of female scholars and female Sufis. When it comes to religious practice, often women do face barriers in having the same access and opportunities and history as men. And so I just would love to know how you have navigated the Sufi path as a woman.
Well, it's a very important question, because barriers tell you a lot about the world we live in and what we are surrounded by. And of course, this is one of the very difficult times where women are extremely commodified. We live in a consumption culture. We have this constant need of validation from culture and society and media. So it's a strange world. And yes, a lot of my life has been about countering these opposing forces externally. But I think the biggest barrier was my inner barriers. And the reason I say that is because I feared myself more than I feared anything else. And I realized that I have shamed myself more than any culture and society would do, because my inner narrative was an extension of shame that would not end. And I've harmed myself more, because even when the narratives and the external situations changed, I just could not get out of that. So how did I understand? See, being visible, I mean, I've come out with my classes and the things that I'm saying after a certain level I've reached, because what I was doing, or what was happening to me, I was not doing anything. I was just struggling and entering domains that I'd never done before. And for me, the challenge to come and speak about these issues, which are very, very intuitive or spiritual, it's very difficult to linguistically explain these things. But I had to develop a kind of language and make people understand through the ways that we've been taught by, like how the narratives, I mean, most of my work is how to dismantle narratives. And once you do that, then you actually start listening to the voice that you've not listened to. And that's what, and I'm just, honestly, I'm not claiming to be a teacher here. I'm a seeker. I only make women understand how I understood things. For me, basically, I had to how many masks I have to take off externally and how many fears I have to remove inwardly in order for me to understand who I am and what I'm meant to do, or what is my potential as a human being. So this just took me back to my primary identity, who I am. And remember, we have a beautiful hadith by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that if to know yourself is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's very true. It's literally like that. So it takes me back, who I am. Am I a human being having a spiritual experience, or I'm really a luminous spiritual being having a human experience? Now, this is two different ways of looking at life. And then, what is my primary relationship then? A relationship I had, not just with myself, is with my Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I had an existence before I came here, and I'm going to have an existence after I leave this world. So there's a pre-existence and there's an afterlife. As Muslims, we believe in that. So if I go back to the center of being a luminous being who is having a human experience, so then life becomes walking through corridors where there are different rooms. You have to encounter misery, age, disease, death, loss, happiness, joy. But then they're not marking me. I don't feel, I don't feel that kind of despair anymore, because I retrieve back to my primal identity as a ruh, as a light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if I go back to the Quran, Suru is Amre Rabbi, coming from Allah. So Allah blew, Allah blew his breath. We've come from his breath. We've come from his light. So I am a manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's light and attributes. Isn't this what Ibn Arabi and Rumi and everybody says? So that becomes my center. Now I can look at death in a different perspective. I can look at, a crashing of my relationship, a disaster, something that happens in my love life. I can see it. I can put it in perspective. I can put the loss of a child in perspective. Everything changes from there. And I'm telling you, the inner barrier was much more difficult because I just didn't know. I come from this generation who don't know how to stop the head. And you have to silence the head, and you have to, this world of sensuous reality, which page after page, any Sufi text you pick up, they're talking about this sensuous reality has to go down in order for the meaning to emerge. And that's something we have lost, we've forgotten, and there are no teachers out teaching to us, So as you just understand, this reality as external reality that we are fixated, and which has made us despair, and which has given us stress and anxiety, because I used to feel suffocated. I didn't know how to even, operate in this world anymore, especially when you go through afflictions and crisis. So how do you retreat back to the heart? And the inner barrier comes. Our only goes when you learn Haira, going back to the heart, understanding I'm a Ruh. I am a primarily Ruh. I had a pre-existence. I have witnessed the Qurb of Allah, and I'm going to go back to him. And it just makes me fall in love with Imam Ghazali again, whose last poem is the most beautiful encounter, an anticipation of encounter to meet your Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Finally, you're away from this world again, this world of nafs. So it's all about nafs, understanding the nafs, putting nafs in its place. And then the idea of purifying nafs, which is actually you go into the meaning of everything. Everything that we encounter in this life has been customized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we are not encountering the world. We are encountering him in every relationship, in every event, in everything we experience. So as you become aware of that everything is meaningful, that there is joy in everything, then there is knowledge in everything, then there's nothing to be despaired. You are already saved because you're already with him. He's not cut off from you. And that brings a kind of grounding and braveness and joy and a sense of, looking at yourself finally with integrity and dignity and reverence and love and awe. And that's what matters in the end. And from there, everything changes. Then you can live with a nasty husband and you can still forgive him. Then you can overlook at the rebelliousness of your children who don't listen to you and still have compassion with them. Then you can actually go out there and truly love and bond with people and serve them with nothing holding you back. It just makes you brave and beautiful and so much, the bringing and understanding the meaningfulness of our life and our being is the most delightful, most rejoicing, profound experience of our life. And that's what we need to do. Sorry, I just become very passionate.
No, that was really wonderful. And now I'm really reassessing my entire life. So this is good. I'm even thinking about this question itself of being on a scale of one to Muslim. How Sufi are you? I mean, maybe we should end on that question. Should we be asking ourselves that? How would you respond to that question? Would you throw that question out of the window? I mean, Dr. Humera, I'll start with you, and then I will go to the other panelists.
I don't know how to answer it. I'm just a person who's mad for knowledge and love, and I want to truly be alive as Allah wanted me to be. I really don't understand the title of the thing, but I know what it is to love. And honestly, the love of people and the love of your husband and the love of your children is not separated from Allah. Every love we encounter takes us back to the source of love, which is Allah subhanahu. We are loving Allah through everything. Mm-hmm. So my message is love and do and become outrageous.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Medina, What would you like to say?
Well, it's a bit of a trick question because it makes it sound like Muslims at one end and Sufis at the other, and I think one is a completion of the other in a way. One is a fulfillment of bringing sincerity to form, presence to ritual, and it's a union of the inner and the outer. And I think probably all of us would have to say we don't rate very highly in that respect, but I think just having the intention to try is a very good start.
Thank you so much for just such a compelling conversation. So thank you to Dr. Humera Shahid, for Professor Alan Williams, and Medina Tanor Whiteman for a truly fascinating conversation. And thank you to all the viewers for joining us today.